A D&D campaign does not begin in your mom's basement, neither does it start when you and all your friends gather around the table or in a Discord channel. No, a D&D campaign begins at the inception of your character, and you write down the special numbers on your sheet that will make or break you across the course of your journey. So let's take some time to fully understand the numbers and how they'll influence your choices and actions. To be clear, I'm not demanding that you play D&D in a specific way. It's more like building your character so they work the way you want them to. In the official Player's Handbook, you'll be encouraged to embrace your creativity and let your mind run wild with the possibilities. I agree that D&D is probably one of the most versatile gaming platforms available to people today, but there are two constants to D&D that all players and DMs must abide. And those are, players drive the plot, and you have to beat the bad guy in a fight. You may like the idea of a warrior that is capable of matching wits with a dastardly wizard, or maybe that your warlock's patron demands that they never skip leg day. But when you walk into a battle situation and you find you may as well be slapping bandits with the salami rather than a sword, or that as a wizard you couldn't spell your own name, and you're stuck like that for the next 2 sessions, you may find yourself not wanting to complete your D&D adventure as much as when you started. It's one of the biggest misconceptions in modern D&D, that the idea that you can do anything or be anything is what makes it fun. Alternatively, I propose that it is the choices you're able to make that is what makes it fun, and in order to make choices you need to understand what you're choosing. It's no fun bashing your head into a brick wall 10 times until you get it, especially when those attempts will be at the price of you sitting in your session like a dummy that is incapable of doing anything for at least an hour. Also, for the duration of the video, you may assume that I'm using the 2024 Player's Handbook to help you build your character. So let's get started, and there's no better place to start than the character sheet. The character sheet looks overwhelming, sure, but don't worry, I'm here and I'll hold your hand as we get through this. The character sheet can be broken down into 2 sections, the lore section and the game stats section. The lore section is there to help you interact with the world of D&D, and help you remember all the details that may relate to social interactions with NPCs. The game stats section tracks your quantifiable stats that are used in encounters to determine whether your actions succeed or fail. We'll take it slow and start with the lore. Don't worry, you don't have to be a Tolkien level writer to create a backstory for your character. First up is your character name. It doesn't have to be a winner. Putting pressure on yourself to pick a good name is probably the biggest cause of writer's block in the fantasy genre, but Dave the Human and Keith the Orc are just as capable of swinging a sword or winning a spelling bee as Xantinos the Wild Whisperer. After character name we have race. Nope, not that kind of race. Race is in type of people. In the PHB we have 10 playable races. Aasimar, Dragonborn, Dwarf, Elf, Gnome, Goliath, Halfling, Human, Orc, and Tiefling. Thanks to the update from the 2024 edition of the PHB, you don't really need to sweat much over choosing a race unless you're a consummate min-maxer. As of 2024, there are no stat benefits to your race, however there are racial abilities like breath weapons for Dragonborn or an HP boost for the Dwarf. So while it's not necessary to pick a certain race to play a certain class, the potential for min-maxing is still there, just more in a passive way. But I'll give you some suggestions since you came here for help and not for me to tell you picking a race doesn't matter. Dwarves, Dragonborn, and Tiefling make for good tanks because they have innate damage resistance. Elves, Halflings, and Orcs have innate mobility abilities. The Gnome is innately resistant to spells, and Humans, Goliaths, and Aasimars are utility races in that their race allows them to possess skills that benefit their party. Fun fact, Goliaths are the only race with a movement stat of 35, everyone else has a movement of 30. But as a Chad human enjoyer myself who doesn't need a mommy and daddy to be magical to succeed in the cruel fantasy world of D&D, I wouldn't stress about it. Now let me take you back to school to talk about classes. Since we're creating a character, you're starting out at level 1, and you have 12 classes of which you can assign your level to, and you gain experience at levels as you progress through the game. So who are these classes and what do they do? This isn't a video that's going to go too deep into the playstyle of each class, but here's a quick summary. Bards and Clerics are support classes who buff and heal allies and debuff enemies. Fighters, Rangers, Warlocks, and Sorcerers are all damage classes who can output consistent damage. Barbarians, Monks, and Paladins are bulky classes that either have an innate ability that increases their armor class or have ways to heal themselves. Finally, we have the utility classes of Wizard, Rogue, and Druid. These guys are capable of performing a variety of actions which make them strong in certain situations. Now lower those pitchforks and torches. I know you'll treat my opinion with the utmost generosity in the comments, but for those who can't comprehend my sarcasm, I'll just come out and say it. Technically you could make any class perform any role, and players do have the freedom to play the class as they wish, but some classes are just better suited to certain jobs than others, and this guide is guessing that you're just starting out, so don't feel the need to go too fancy off the rip. In order to have fun, one must feel that their actions have a definitive effect on the game, is a quote I just came up with. With that wisdom in mind, I would now like to direct you to the alignment section of your character sheet. We could stand here philosophizing about alignment and what it really means, but I'll be honest with you, no one seems to really care much about it. It doesn't have a real purpose in the eyes of most players and DMs. As morality is not static, the reality is that it's fluid. And what you may consider as good may be considered as evil by someone else, so it's hard to use it in gameplay. If I was going to describe alignment or how I would see it implemented in a game, I would call it a vibe check. Creatures and people with alignment related to yours being some combination of good, neutral, evil, chaotic, and lawful will be friendly depending on their relationship to your alignment. Two lawful good characters will like each other better than a lawful good and a neutral good, and still like, but not really, a chaotic good. Unfortunately or fortunately, alignment is regarded as a garbage category, so don't think too hard about it. And that's all the game impacting lore choices, is what I would say if the PHP 2024 didn't add some new mechanics. So this is for all the new guys and the D&D boomers listening. As of 2024, D&D has this new background system whereby you describe what job your character had before becoming an adventurer. This is an obvious ploy to get players more into the role-playing aspect of D&D by writing part of your backstory for you, as well as tying it to game mechanics. Alright Hasbro, we'll play your game. There are 16 background origins. I'm not going to list them all because that's going to make the video drag, and instead I'll put up a picture with the relevant info. Back before the new PHP, backgrounds merely granted proficiencies, which were passive skills you could use to perform certain tasks in the world, but now there are stats connected to the backgrounds. This means that choosing your background will deeply impact your gameplay as you're now reliant on the ability score improvements that come with your selected background. What else I find interesting about this new change is that you get a feat or passive ability with your background, so there is that to consider. I'm not going to explain which background to get for which build or class because it will become evident in the next section. This is more of a shout out to the trap philosophy of D&D, who advocate for anyone can be anything when in reality, if you want to have fun, you're going to need to have a little know-how and planning involved, which is what I'm for. We're nearing the end of the lore section of your character sheet. Now we're in the little part in the top right that's entirely subjective and kind of tied to alignment. This section covers personality, ideals, bonds, and flaws. This section is to help you create a persona for your character. As I'm sure you've noticed from the countless D&D Improv Drama Club podcasts, the D&D community loves it when you go the extra mile and start doing funny voices in your sessions. Don't feel too much pressure when filling out these sections. It's more for you to remind yourself about how your character plays off others, than a commitment to an acting career that spans the duration of your campaign. Probably the most significant decision you'll make is your character's life goals, because in D&D, past characters tend to make a comeback in future campaigns. With that, we've officially cleared the lore section, which provides the idea of who your character is and how you want to interact with the D&D world. Now you need mechanics to know how effective your character is in fulfilling that identity, and we do that, dear YouTube enjoyer, through ability stats. Stats are the quantifiable part of your character that you use to resolve conflicts over the course of the campaign. The lowest stat you can possibly have is 8, and the highest you can have with a level 1 character is 17. This can be improved upon as your character progresses to a maximum of 20. Stats affect the success of your character through stat modifiers, which are a mechanic that says for every 2 points of a certain stat above a stat total of 10, you get to add a +1 to whatever action that stat is tied to, be it sword swinging or magic spelling, increasing its likelihood of success. A score of 9 or below gets you a -1 penalty modifier to the associated ability, so be aware of trading low stats in one category for high stats in another. Now that we've crunched the numbers, it's time to get to know the different flavors of stats and their uses. There are 6 total flavors of ability stats: Strength, Dexterity, Constitution, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. Strength is the athletic stat that allows you to carry a lot of items in your backpack, hit hard with all melee weapons, and jump large distances. Dexterity is the precision stat that allows you to hit with ranged weapons, dodge and deflect attacks, and determines whether you get to make an attack before your enemy. Constitution is the HP stat that determines passively how much HP you'll be gaining as you level. It also determines how resistant you are to things like poison or losing concentration in spells. Intelligence is the wizard stat, in that only wizards and sometimes rogues and fighters use it. It's the stat that helps you be a know-it-all. Wisdom is the perception stat that allows you to notice things in your environment like traps and ambushes. It also protects against the majority of crowd control spells. Finally, Charisma is the persuasion stat. It lets you be successful in talking to NPCs or seducing the big bad. But those are just the general meaning of stats. When it comes to talking classes, there are a couple more considerations. All classes have a primary ability stat with which they'll use to resolve their specific class-based ability checks. These primary ability stats are also commonly tied to the primary gameplay role each class is trying to satisfy. For example, typical melee classes like barbarians and fighters will have strength as their primary ability, because they rely on hitting things accurately and hard with their weapons. This is contrary to the spellcaster classes like clerics and druids, who judge their spell accuracy and effectiveness by their primary ability wisdom stat, while spellcasters like warlocks and sorcerers will use charisma as their primary ability stats, and wizards get to sit on their own with the intelligence stat for spellcasting. Rogues, rangers, and monks all use the dexterity stat to hit things with ranged and finesse weapons. Unless you're a monk, then you use hands. But a side note should be made that rangers and monks do cast spells using the wisdom stat. While paladins are generally thought of as melee fighters reliant on strength, a lot of their spells and abilities depend on the charisma stat. What I'm trying to say here is that it's a really good idea to juice up your primary ability stat so that you pass your class ability checks, and to make sure that you're able to hit things with swords or spells. You can take this as a general but not hard rule, that the stats for your character should be primarily focused around the big three, which are your class primary ability stat, Constitution, and Dexterity. Constitution and Dexterity are there because they are considered strategically important. Constitution provides you with HP, which prevents you from getting one-shotted, and Dexterity not only lets you hit your enemies first, but contributes to a secondary defense stat called Armor Class. Armor Class is basically the stat that an attacker needs to overcome to make a successful attack, and so is very valuable. So now that you know what each ability stat does, and what you should focus on, we can now talk about how stats are allocated, and there are two different systems that you can use. In the standard system, you're allowed to assign one stat with either 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, or 8. Alternatively, there is the popular points bind system which you can use. You can use a website like roll20.net to do this one, since it's more complicated but allows you more freedom while keeping your character balanced. Remember, thanks to the 2024 PHP background mechanic, you also get to add a +2 and a +1 to a stat relevant to your background, or +1 to all three stats, so be sure to account for that when building your character. And that's it for your character stats. Now I'm just going to clear up how stats act passively. Passive stats like saving throws and skills are reliant on both your stat modifiers, which we discussed earlier, and your proficiency bonus. Your proficiency bonus is a stat that grows with your level, starting at +2 for levels 1 to 4, and increasing by 1 until you reach +6 for levels 17 to 20. You have passive proficiency in any skill or saving throw based on your stat modifier, but if you are proficient in a skill or saving throw through your class and or race, you add both your proficiency bonus and stat modifier to the skill roll. I'll be throwing up the list of all 18 stats that exist so you can see what stats affect them, and you can determine what numbers need to go where. The final passive to take care of is your passive perception stat, which allows you to notice things in your environment. So instead of you rolling every time you enter a room or a new environment, something that is hidden needs to make a roll against your passive perception. Passive perception is calculated by adding 10 to your wisdom modifier and your proficiency bonus if you're proficient in perception. So if your wisdom stat is 14, that's a +2 modifier, which gives you a passive proficiency score of 12. And then add your proficiency bonus if you're proficient. And that's your character built. I know there's a section in the middle, but that's for tracking your character on your adventure, the amount of hit points which you calculate off your stats, the attacks and spells which you'll get from your class and equipment. Armor class is the last thing we need to cover, mostly because it's kind of confusing. Armor class is calculated off your dexterity modifier +10. However, if you're a barbarian or monk, you'll add your constitution modifier or wisdom modifier respectively, as well as your dexterity modifier. Light, medium and heavy armor change the +10, but typically medium armor only allows for a maximum of +2 to AC from your dexterity modifier, and heavy armor reduces your bonus to armor from your dexterity modifier to 0. One final note is that you get damage bonus to weapons based on your stats, which is strength for melee and dexterity for ranged weapons. Finally, we're done. I won't be talking about specific builds and loadouts for classes because this video is already long enough. I hope I managed to enlighten you on your decisions for when you create a character for your D&D campaign. I'm kind of shocked at how bad the player's handbook is so bad at passing out information. That and the offhand approach to character creation, which will likely frustrate a lot of new players, which I hope I helped reduce in some way. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe. If you didn't like it, feel free to leave a comment. I'm happy to learn how I can improve, and I'll catch you on the next video.